the time. In fact, he told me that when we were courting, he actually...
We circle, and nothing is resolved. I'm done. I'm tired. I'm done.
What if the instant everything seemed so fine was the very same moment it all came crashing down? You know, that silence, the one that contains an entire lifetime, the smile that goes on a little bit too far, the dinner table that seems to be colder. Even with everyone seated, sometimes it's not the yelling that marks the end, sometimes it's what you don't hear that speaks the loudest. This is not another tale of a marriage falling apart or a reality TV program reaching its finale. It's about something far more intimate and familiar. What happens when women who've spent years sacrificing, holding families together, and staying silent finally decide to speak? You may not know their names, but you'll recognize their journey. A wife who stayed, hoping to be seen again, another quiet and steady, the one who never asked for much, but gave everything, and then one who saw it coming piece by piece until the whole illusion finally cracked wide open, and then a tape, a recording that wasn't supposed to exist, a few private words caught by accident, never meant to be heard outside that room, but once uttered, they resonated far louder than anyone might have thought. What those words conveyed wasn't merely betrayal, it was the unwinding of something everyone had held in their hearts, a family, a building a life together, and not with a bang it. Was in whispers and prolonged glances and soft dawn that they were never actually on firm foundation. If you've ever been the person to keep things together when no one paid attention, if you've ever lingered too long, just in case it would feel like it once did, if you've ever felt yourself erased from a tale you co-wrote, then you'll know this, because this isn't about anger, it's about truth. It's about what happens when the spotlight goes down and the truth, quiet, unflinching, finally comes into focus. Pour yourself a cup of tea, sit back, because what followed next changed everything. What if the very instant that seems so perfect on the outside was in fact the instant it all began to crumble? Perhaps you've witnessed it before, the reserved wife who holds everything together. The faithful one, the consistent one. She never complains, she doesn't make a scene. She just keeps smiling while the cracks beneath her slowly spread, and maybe, just maybe, you've been that person yourself. But what happens when the silence finally breaks and it's louder than all the arguments that came before? This isn't just another episode of Sister Wives, no. This is what happened when the cameras were supposed to stop rolling, but the truth kept coming out anyway, like many unravelings. It didn't begin with a dramatic blow-up. It started softly with something as small as a whisper, a microphone left on. By accident, a private conversation that was never meant for public ears, and then there it was, a voice, one you recognize, sharp, bitter, and shockingly cruel, the type of voice you might find from a stranger, but it came from someone these women used to address as sister, pretend you're mocked, discuss like you were baggage behind your back all those years, being the reliable one, the quiet one, the faithful one, and doing it not an enemy, not from outside the family, but someone who shared your holidays, sat beside you at the table year after year. For Meri, Janelle, and Christine, this wasn't a moment. This was confirmation. All they'd quietly doubted, all their nervous feelings they'd pushed aside. It was real. It wasn't stress. It wasn't how family works. Number, the truth came in the door without knocking. And the strongest part, they didn't scream. They didn't flip tables or storm out in a dramatic scene for the cameras. Number, far braver, they stood up, they walked away, and they spoke the truth, because this story, it isn't just about a marriage ending. It's not just the collapse of a TV show. It's about what happens when women stop waiting to be picked and start picking themselves. If you've ever stayed too long, if you've ever longed to turn back the clock and be like it was in the first place, if you've ever felt invisible in the same space you've helped create, then this tale will resonate deeply with you. It's about fidelity, identity, and recognizing when it's time to say enough. There's something so familiar in what these women experienced, particularly if you've raised a family, stuffed your feelings away, or been the one who held everything together in secret while quietly unraveling. But now the tables have turned. The ones who kept quiet before their talking, and the man who constructed his world on their quiet. He's observing that world come apart. Nevertheless, don't confuse this with a story of revenge or anger. This isn't bitterness, it's clarity. So go ahead, brew a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's discuss what actually transpired once the lights went out, when the secrets escaped, and the truth wouldn't remain hidden, because once you hear what was recorded in that intimate audio, you'll realize this wasn't merely the demise of a family. It was the legacy of the women who suffered, who remained strong as everything around them crumbled. And that is where our story actually starts off. You see, it appears more and more that Cody and Robyn had something up their sleeves all along, as if they were just working out their own little scenario of how things were going to go. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Janelle was cooking up plans of her own in the background too. What you see on television, that may only be half of it, because here's the thing about the truth: it doesn't like being buried long behind the facade of what had appeared to be a fairy tale. Family, the ground was already starting to shift. The silent strength these women had maintained for so long began to ring less like resilience and more like resignation, and at the very heart of that gradual unraveling, a moment that nobody saw coming, a secret recording, a shattered illusion, the end of the beginning not only of a marriage, but of a reality show empire that had reigned for over a decade. This is the moment when Sister Wives ceased being merely a television program and became something so much more visceral, so much more real, a full-blown war zone for emotions. And all this while the cameras never stopped rolling. The program had wrapped, production was finished, the boom mics were put away, the lights extinguished, and the production team had already begun retracting from the cold sack. On the outside, everything seemed over, but it wasn't. A tiny detail had been missed: a clip-on microphone. Still in place under Cody Brown's shirt, still active, still recording what it recorded. Wasn't for public consumption. It was rough, unedited, and brutally candid. Cody was leaned forward on the couch, resembling the burden of the last 20 years had finally descended upon his shoulders. His shirt hung halfway untucked, and he appeared exhausted, not in body, but in spirit. One could almost sense the weight of the air as he massaged his temples and grumbled into his chest. This whole scenario is revolting. Robyn was standing in the entranceway, arms crossed tightly. She didn't scream, she didn't have to. The tension spoke volumes. "What did you just say?" she asked stiffly. Cody didn't even look up. His tone was low, but biting, like every word had been coated in acid. "Living like this, the deception, the lies, you, me, all of us, that's when the facade slipped." Robyn winced, actually stepped back, like his words had landed on her physically. "So now you're blaming me?" She retaliated. Cody didn't yell, but his words sliced through the room like a knife. "You manipulate everything, you cry, you spin it around until I'm unable to breathe. I'm choking on it." It wasn't rage. Not exactly. It was something more profound, something colder. The kind of truth that only emerges when people cease pretending and speak the truth as they see it. That wasn't merely rage. It was something colder, a heavy, exhausted kind of truth. The kind that can only emerge when someone's too exhausted to continue lying. And the most surprising thing, it was all still being taped, every word raw, unfiltered, totally off the cuff. But that moment, that wasn't the first time Robyn's own words haunted her back later. The same night, believing she was in the privacy of her own bedroom, Robyn dropped her guard with a producer she trusted. What she didn't realize was that a backup recorder, quietly waiting on a shelf in earshot, was still rolling. Her voice had altered. This was not the version of Robyn who was aware of the cameras watching this time. Her voice broke with exasperation. "He actually blamed me," she wept, but then her grief changed. Her voice hardened. "Janelle's out there playing martyr, some pioneer woman," she snapped, "and Meri, she's like a moping ghost from Victorian times. This wasn't an impulse nighttime emotional meltdown. It was calculated, cruel, mean-spirited, this angry, bitter tongue lashing." Robyn wasn't the version that fans were used to. She stormed around the room, berating being the only one still attending, the only one who was trying to keep the family together. The only one Cody should have stood up for. They should be thanking me, she spat. I'm the one who kept this whole circus from falling apart. And then she laughed, but not the kind of laugh that says things are fine. No, this was something colder, harsher. The type of laugh you employ to gloss over something that's been brewing for way too long, that laugh and all the rest. She said in that instant would come to be referred to online as clip 14. Do not delete, nobody knows exactly how that clip ended. Up out in the world, there wasn't a signature, no return address, a simple envelope containing a flash drive sent anonymously to a retired show editor with initial curiosity. Within hours, that became outright shock by dawn. The whole recording had appeared on Reddit, and from there it snowballed. This wasn't rumor anymore, this wasn't speculation, this was Robyn, unedited and uncensored at her worst. Ridiculing the very women she had once referred to as sisters, the veil was lifted, and once fans heard her authentic voice, they couldn't unhear it. Janelle didn't have to listen to the entire thing to get it. She'd already experienced it, but when she heard Robyn call her a martyr with a complex, something changed. That wasn't something said for the cameras, that was Robyn's real voice, the one saved for behind closed doors. Alone in her own kitchen hands, shaking, Janelle pressed replay, and then she laughed, not because it was hilarious, but because finally in years she was free at all. Fell into place, she'd watched it happen, Cody fading away bit by bit, Robyn inching over to the middle, and the others pushed aside. Moment by silent moment, but now everyone else could see it too. The truth didn't just have a shape anymore, it had a voice, and that voice was loud. The cameras were supposed to turn off, but fate, it seems, had other plans. The lights may have dimmed them, but the truth, it was blazing like never before. This wasn't just another chapter in Sister Wives. This wasn't the breakdown of a family. This was the falling apart of a legacy, and those who had assisted in keeping it together. Those same people now capturing everything on camera. Now, then the real question, was this destiny sabotage, or was it merely the truth finally absolutely refusing to remain buried? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you're as hooked as we are, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell, because this story, it's far from over. Undefined, the consequences were real. You could sense it in the air. It wasn't all about love lost or broken hearts. This was about control. And what do you do when the masterfully crafted fantasy finally utterly collapses? Even Robyn, Cody's self-proclaimed spiritual wife, couldn't escape his frustration now when Meri called and asked if we were doing anything for our anniversary. She confessed to someone afterwards. I just said, well, I'm babysitting. I needed a minute or whatever. The cracks had reached her too. Meanwhile, in another part of the state, a phone rang, no greeting, just a single question. Sharp, emotional, have you heard it? Janelle didn't require explanation. She already understood years of tension, of distance were finally over. She and Christine were standing eye to eye at last. Both had made concessions, Christine more publicly, Janelle more privately. Both had clung to hope for far too many years. They thought that perhaps maybe the family they had established still counted for something, that their suffering, their waiting, their devotion meant something, that fantasy, it no longer existed. Christine had had enough. No more acting, no more apologies, no more standing back and letting Robyn play the innocent, while secretly manipulating everything from behind the scenes. That polished facade that Robyn had presented for so many years, it had slipped, and what lay beneath it was as clear as crystal. Robyn had never been one of them. She'd just worn the mask long enough to gain influence, and Peru and Meri had a printed out version of Robyn's words in her lap, but she didn't actually read them. Not quite. She gazed at them the way you would gaze at a headstone to Meri. Those words signified the end of something she'd clung to for years. She had assumed hope that if she only remained loyal, if she waited long enough, Cody would return to her, but hearing herself described as a tragic Victorian ghost, that wasn't merely cruel, hurtful, it was done. The curtain fell. Meri didn't have a sensational breakdown. She didn't shriek or launch things. Her collapse was quieter, but clear as something within her broke not from anger, but from determination. She finally saw it as it truly was. She didn't need to continue clinging to a family that had in reality released her a long time before. What she did need to do was go through that door and close it behind her. Nobody predicted that the fallout would get the front page, but it did, and when it struck, it came like a thunderclap over the web. That leak tape, it was posted anonymously, but it spread quicker and wider than any TLC promotional material could. Reddit posts went wild. Instagram reels repeated the clip of Cody uttering those incriminating words about Robyn, said over shots of her drying tears on TV. I'm sorry that had been so nicely buffed for reality television removed. What remained was raw, unedited, genuine, and the viewers weren't watching anymore. They were engaged, connecting dots, uncovering receipts, time-stomping episodes, overwhelming comment sections of anger that felt very personal. The glossy, polished illusion had cracked, and a lot of PR spin couldn't hold it together. Behind the offices of TLC, there was panic. Executives convened in hushed corners, lawyers argued NDAs and exposure to the law, but the producers of the show, they saw something completely different. This is the story. One executive grumbled, we don't even need a script anymore. And then from the fringes came an old editor, stepped forward, quiet, serene, and truthful. He owned up to leaking the tape, not out of revenge, but out of fatigue. He had worn it around for far too long, all the tension, the moral tangles, the burden of what he'd witnessed behind the scenes. To let loose that clip wasn't about dropping a bomb. It was in his book, an act of justice, a reckoning. As they returned to Flagstaff, Janelle's phone was blinding like a Christmas tree. Her family group chat, typically filled with updates and friendly teasing, was now humming with links, screenshots, and shocked responses. Even the younger children, normally spared the worst of the family drama, were witnessing the reality unravel. And then came a text from Gabe, one of the least vocal of the group. Just 5 words. He really said it. It wasn't that Gabe did not believe the words, it's that he did. And all these years he'd carried them in tow, like a shadow told to shut up. Ignore, keep the peace now. He had evidence. Janelle curled up on her couch, replaying the clip again on her phone, and there were no tears, no anger, just a sort of profound, settled peace. Like the storm had finally passed through and shown her what had always been there. The truth wasn't hiding any longer. It had come to rest precisely where it needed to be, out in the open. Meri, on the other hand, had the transcript in front of her, and she read it once again and again. Each sentence weighed on her like a stone on her chest. She'd put up with Cody's coldness for years, his absence, his emotional distance. That pain was familiar. She'd come to terms with that years ago, but hearing Robyn, the woman she once so warmly accepted, describe her as a tragic Victorian ghost, that stung. That wasn't careless. That was personal. It was betrayal, raw and gnawing, and the worst hurt, it wasn't Cody's words that crushed her. It was Robyn's tone, cut condescending and tinged with a sort of self-righteousness that made the words cut all the deeper. With Cody, Meri had prepared herself. She had expected to be abandoned, but with Robyn, she had dared to hope for sisterhood, hope for some warmth, a common bond. Even a gentle word, every so often, something other than the truth. Robyn hadn't just endured the other wife's silence, she had constructed her power based on it, flourished because of it, while the others grew too weary to fight. Robyn had quietly taken center stage. That was the game, and Meri had finally had enough. She sat down at her computer, hands trembling, not from fear, but from years of holding it all in. There were no producers hovering, no crew, just Meri, her voice, her truth. It shook at first, but it held. I'm not a ghost, she said softly but firmly, and I'm not desperate. I was dedicated. I was lied to, and yeah, I hung around too long. She paused, her gaze drifting past the screen into the room where trust once dwelled. And then at that moment, she made her decision, but I won't be quiet anymore. You attempted to erase me, but I remain. Here I still matter, and just like that, Meri had something she hadn't ever really had in years herself, not as Cody's wife, not as a bit player on the periphery of someone else's romance, just Meri her own person. And if Robyn thought that Cody's mic slip was the only secret that had come up, she was more misinformed than she could ever even begin to imagine, because the aftermath, it didn't remain hidden. It seeped like smoke into all the quiet spaces where the family's cracks had previously remained concealed, but this time there was no sweeping it under the rug, no hushing it up at her kitchen counter. Janelle had her phone and sat, her fingers shook a little as she hit play. No gasp, no crying, no over-the-top explosion, because the words, they didn't shock her in fact, they rang almost familiarly, a reflection of the nightmare she had practiced in her mind for years. And yet to hear that smugness in Robyn's voice, so cutting, so self-assured, tightened her stomach. She has a martyr complex, Robyn had mocked. So independent, but she can't even get Cody to text her back. Janelle didn't flinch. She merely let out a sharp, hard laugh, not of amusement, but of a sense of long-awaited freedom. At last the facade was dropped. The truth, the one she'd been keeping silent all these years, was now laid out for the world to see. She'd always been the reliable one, the practical one, the woman who did not require the limelight. While the others bickered or wept, she held the household together. She didn't care for attention. She didn't beg. She just continued on. I mean, Meri and I were in such a horrible place. She recalled we were fighting, and all the while she was asking me to not stare at her, and all the while Robyn was backstage pulling the strings quietly. Behind the curtain, she'd cry on demand for the cameras, then turn around and backroomed from behind the scenes. She became an emotional crutch for Cody, and gradually, quietly, she drove the other wives deeper into exile. But now the lights had dimmed. The performance was over, and the audience could see at last what had actually been transpiring backstage. On the phone, Christine's voice pierced. "Have you heard it?" "I heard every word," Janelle answered softly, and that was all. There was nothing further to say. The illusions were dispelled. No more make-believe, no more illusions. The entire charade of togetherness had fallen apart, and not through a plot reveal, but through Robyn's own lips. But strangely enough, Janelle did not feel devastated. She felt liberated. It was like someone had carefully severed the last strand that bound her to a gorgeous fiction. It was never about love. She breathed practically to herself about control. Even Cody, she had come to understand, couldn't abide what Robyn had turned into. There was no resentment in her voice, just tranquility. She wasn't making suppositions about how Cody felt anymore, or wondering if he even recalled that she was alive. She was no longer beneath the rubble. She was outside of it, peeking in. And that was everything, because once you give up trying to explain away another person's abuse, once you cease to shrink to fit into their narrative, you begin to write your own story. And at that moment, Janelle grabbed the pen in a quaint bed and breakfast in Peroin. Meanwhile, Meri sat motionlessly in the window. A rumpled transcript lay beside a half-empty cup of tea. She gazed out the glass, her mind elsewhere, a tragic Victorian ghost. It was not just a bitter remark. It was a blade and slashing dismissal of all she'd struggled to maintain, all she'd borne in silence. She'd had worse things said about her over the years, by Cody, by strangers on the internet, even by herself at her worst moments. But to hear Robyn say the only woman she'd defended over and over again, that stung in a way the others didn't. She felt it latch in her chest, not as a cry, but something constricted, cutting. It wasn't sadness, it was rage, not boisterous or theatric. Just a slow burning fire that had been building for decades. She'd been disregarded, kept on hand, but never quite seen, and yet she had remained Meri. Had reassured herself over and over that Robyn liked her, that Robyn viewed her as a sister, that the bond existed. But now she realized for what it really was. She wasn't a sister. She was a stand-in, someone to hold on to until she no longer filled Amy, so Meri flipped open her laptop, not for business, not for branding, not to promote anything this time. It wasn't for anyone else, it was for her. I'm not a ghost. She said aloud, her voice quiet but steady, deliberate, and undone performing silence. There were no tears, no dramatic declarations, just the truth. And for once that was enough, because the deepest wound hadn't come from Robyn's insults, it had come from Meri's own belief that she still mattered, that her devotion still counted, that all her years of appearing, of clinging, had somehow meant something, but the illusion had at last snapped, and instead stood something far more powerful. Not vengeance, not bitterness. Resolve. Meri was not going to just fade away this time. She was not going to be deleted. And Janelle, her boots pounded the pavement with intent. No cameras, no TLC crew behind her, just Janelle and a crumpled transcript of the interview shoved into her jacket pocket. Everything had a new kind of intensity in her eyes. She wasn't going into another battle. She was going directly into the truth. Robyn had ridiculed her before labeling her a martyr with a complex butt. What Robyn never realized was the martyrs do not break, they soar. After all, Janelle had been through raising kids, mostly by herself, suffering through emotional abandonment, being the invisible pillar of the family, and yet always being shoved aside. After it all, she was now being ridiculed by the same person who had benefited most from her silence. The front door opened with a creak. Robyn stood there, arms crossed, red-rimmed eyes, but the look on her face was hard. Janelle did not see sorrow. There she saw self-pity, and that was a glance she'd seen too many times. She walked in without knocking. Meri tagged quietly behind her. Unflappable, steady. They said nothing to begin with, not until they sat down at that rusty old table, the same one where they'd celebrated holidays, fought about parenting, talked about birthdays, and had strained family meetings. But today that table wasn't a family place today. It was a war zone. Janelle ended the silence. Her tone was chilly and crystal sharp. Like shattered glass, you don't get to cry and play victim. While you vilify the women who constructed this family, Robyn's eyes widened in surprise then. Meri responded. Her tone shook a little, but it had iron behind it. You called me desperate, you assumed I wouldn't overhear it. Tell it to my face. Now Robyn's mouth opened to retort, but the habituated calm was shattered. She stuttered, reaching for a suitable mask to don, but this time none of them fit. What ensued wasn't some dramatic reality TV moment. It wasn't screaming or flinging glasses or storming out of the house. It was something more, something harder. A reckoning. Janelle didn't scream. She didn't need to. Her serenity was worth more than rage ever could be. She spread it out plain. The years she'd been kept on the sidelines, the sacrifices she'd made, the silent pain she choked down day after day while keeping the family intact in silence. Robyn attempted to defend herself, but it was plain. This was not about regret. This was. Robyn stripped bare, and for once, and no one jumped up to soften her. No one rescued her, because this wasn't television anymore. This was life outside. The air was cold and biting. Meri wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. Janelle let out a breath, long and deep, exhaling one she hadn't even known she'd been holding. No one said sorry, no one hugged, no empty words to repair what had been broken so long against that nothing had changed. Maybe everything, rather, for the first time in a long time. They weren't seeking Cody's permission. They weren't bending to fit into someone else's vision of family, that family once bound together by implicit rules and strangled performances had never really made room for them. For far too long they'd performed in a play that had lost all significance long ago, but no longer. They talk now, not only to Robyn but to themselves. And in that home changed. Robyn leaned across the table, sobbing, not pity tears, not for drama. These were the tears of a woman who had recently recognized the power that once lay in her hands, had slipped silently between her fingers unobtrusively. She sat with her own words, now the words she never suspected anyone else to hear, words that had provided her leverage before now seemed like shackles closing tighter around Her she couldn't spin it, not now, and the man who had ever been at her side, who had guarded her even when the others were hurt. He didn't jump to her defense because he had heard it too. He had overheard. Robyn disparaged the women he had long promised were his spiritual equals, and he hadn't said a word, not in outrage, not in regret, not with something, anything. Just quiet, slow, bitter quiet, the kind that comes when a man finally understands the kingdom he constructed wasn't torn apart by the world outside, but by the very hands he believed he held in his pocket. Cody lost marriages, and a television show. He lost the fantasy of controlled Janelle and Meri. Didn't have dramatic departures or glance over their shoulders. They just walked to their vehicles, heads held high too long. Their power had remained dormant, tucked behind fake smiles and unexpressed disappointment. It had been concealed by years of concessions and waiting to be picked, but now they were finished waiting. They didn't disappear. On their feet because they were healed. They disappeared on their feet because they told the truth. They were no longer wives. They were witnesses. They were survivors, and they weren't looking for a seat at the table anymore. They were overturning the entire thing. There were no fireworks afterward, no finale music, no reality show climax, just silence apiece neither of them had experienced in years. And for Robyn, that silence grew, deafening her home, which had been filled with footsteps and laughter, and the thrum of family now rang only with the echo of her own breathing. Her phone didn't flash. Number texts from the producers, no calls from the other wives, no invites, no reminders for her birthday, no holiday plans together, just nothing. Loneliness had finally curiosity within hours that became outright shock by dawn. The whole recording had appeared on Reddit, and from there it snowballed. This wasn't rumor anymore. This wasn't speculation. This was Robyn, unedited and uncensored. At her worst, ridiculing the very women she had once referred to as sisters. The veil was lifted, and once fans heard her authentic voice, they couldn't unhear it. Janelle didn't have to listen to the entire thing to get it. She had already experienced it. But when she heard Robyn call her a martyr with a complex, something changed. That wasn't something said for the cameras. That was Robyn's real voice, the one saved for behind closed doors, alone in her own kitchen, hands shaking. Janelle pressed replay, and then she laughed, not because it was hilarious, but because finally in years she was free. It all fell into place. She'd watched it happen. Cody fading away bit by bit, Robyn inching over to the middle, and the others pushed aside moment by silent moment. But now everyone else could see it too. The truth didn't just have a shape anymore. It had a voice, and that voice was loud. The cameras were supposed to turn off, but fate, it seems, had other plans. The lights may have dimmed, but the truth, it was blazing like never before. This wasn't just another chapter in Sister Wives. This wasn't the breakdown of a family. This was the falling apart of a legacy, and those who had assisted in keeping it together. Those same people now capturing everything on camera. Now then, the real question was this destiny sabotage, or was it merely the truth finally absolutely refusing to remain buried? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you're as hooked as we are, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell, because this story, it's far from over and defined. The consequences were real. You could sense it in the air. It wasn't all about love, lost, or broken hearts. This was about control, and what do you do when the masterfully crafted fantasy finally utterly collapses? Even Robyn, Cody's self-proclaimed spiritual wife, couldn't escape his frustration now when Meri called and asked if we were doing anything for our anniversary. She confessed to someone afterwards. I just said, well, I'm babysitting. I needed a minute or whatever. The cracks had reached her too. Meanwhile, in another part of the state, a phone rang, no greeting, just a single question. Sharp, emotional. Have you heard it? Janelle didn't require explanation. She already understood. Years of tension, of distance were finally over. She and Christine were standing eye to eye at last. Both had made concessions, Christine more publicly. Janelle more privately, both had clung to hope for far too many years. They thought that perhaps maybe the family they had established still counted for something, that their suffering, their waiting, their devotion meant something, that fantasy it no longer existed. Christine had had enough. No more acting, no more apologies, no more standing back and letting Robyn play the innocent, while secretly manipulating everything from behind the scenes. That polished facade that Robyn had presented for so many years, it had slipped, and what lay beneath it was as clear as crystal. Robyn had never been one of them. She'd just worn the mask long enough to gain influence, and Perot and Meri had a printed out version of Robyn's words in her lap, but she didn't actually read them. Not quite. She gazed at them the way you would gaze at a headstone. To Meri, those words signified the end of something she'd clung to for years. She had assumed hope that if she only remained loyal, if she waited long enough, Cody would return to her. But hearing herself described as a tragic Victorian ghost that wasn't merely cruel, hurtful, it was done. The curtain fell. Meri didn't have a sensational breakdown. She didn't shriek or launch things. Her collapse was quieter, but clearer. Something within her broke, not from anger, but from determination. She finally saw it as it truly was. She didn't need to continue clinging to a family that had in reality released her a long time before. What she did need to do was go through that door and close it behind her. Nobody predicted that the fallout would get the front page, but it did, and when it struck, it came like a thunderclap over the web. That leaked tape. It was posted anonymously, but it spread quicker and wider than any TLC promotional material could. Reddit posts went wild. Instagram reels repeated the clip of Cody uttering those incriminating words about Robyn, set over shots of her drying tears on TV. Outcome, and this time it wasn't temporary. For years, she'd kept herself at the center of a world held together by borrowed love and carefully spun charm, but even the brightest stars fall, especially when gravity fails. And Cody's silence, gravity gone. He hadn't abandoned her, not quite, but something had changed. Something final. She recalled his words, simple but chilling. My defensive view is over. It wasn't rejection, it was detachment. Something chilly. Harder to recover from this was the man who had once broke every family rule to keep her at the center. Now he couldn't even look her in the eye, and that scared her more than anything Meri or Janelle had ever uttered back in Perrin. Meri went back to her little bed and breakfast, not victorious, not even completely at ease, just different. She made herself a cup of tea, let it cool, let it sit, and this time she did not wait for someone else to sit across from her. She drank it by herself, and it was fine. Janelle, too, headed home undefined, but the silence that met her wasn't vacant. It wasn't lonely. It was the kind of silence that envelops you when you finally make up your mind and you don't let go of. Janelle laughed, not a bitter laugh, a real one, the kind of laugh that rises from somewhere deep in your stomach when you finally release something heavy. And for the first time in what felt like forever, that simple pleasure was sufficient. Online, the clip continued to spread. Reddit threads hummed, Instagram reels replayed over and over, YouTube videos analyzed every last second of audio. But to the women who lived it, going viral wasn't the point. This wasn't about scandal or fame. The real power wasn't in the leak, it was in what followed, because what they'd done, it wasn't about blowing the whistle on Robyn. It was about taking something that had been taken from them bit by bit over the years, back their voices, their truth, their dignity. And Cody, he didn't just lose control. He finally realized what that control had cost everyone else around him, the cost of silence and the burden of expectation, the price of being the center with others quietly shoved to the periphery. And perhaps, somewhere in that anguished, painstaking accounting, there was space for something else, something quieter than drama, something truer than control. Healing.